So with physical therapy, do you have a specialty or
Yeah, I do,
focus?
you know, I do enjoy it.
So I see a lot of person. I see a little college athletes, but
Hey, Jessica.
Nice to meet you.
will be the ABO out there doing.
I want to pass the paper down.
Say again?
You are,
Oh,
you
yeah.
are awfully tan.
Let's see.
Same grinds.
It was a fantastic trip. I'll give you the long version at some point. But
Your
holy
daughter.
cow, we got,
In the,
I think we got everybody.
You do?
Remember how long it's been since we're all here. The gang's all here. Nice. All right.
My daughter has no ideas about it.
Like you just have.
She got over the.
I don't get us here, yeah, thank you.
Not have that same height.
Are you the alternate video?
I think so, yeah.
My guess. Richard, you feel great on everything, you still don't.
You know, she needed that at the time.
Yeah,
don't have this
it
yet.
never got changed, so, but whatever.
Okay.
Because
Well, even.
they were in single class.
Well, are we ready?
Darian,
Do you need a second?
she seems super great. I'm ready.
You ready? Okay.
We're all ready.
That's awesome.
Everybody got some food or a drink or
And
situated?
Good to go.
Thanks.
I don't even know how they're.
All right, the mics are going.
Yes.
Okay, we'd like to welcome everybody. It's so good to see everybody's faces. I don't remember the last time that we were all here face to face, so must be a January thing or something. So
It's a snow thing.
that's snow day, nothing better to do. No better offers.
Don't have to go
You
anywhere.
run out of things to do, you shoveled all your snow. We'd like to welcome everybody to our January 17th work session for the Cottonwood Heights City Planning Commission. We have a few things on the business session agenda to take care of. Project ZMA -23-002. A public hearing and possible action on a zoning map amendment request to rezone 0.45 acres of property at 79.
That was me, sorry.
That was, in fact, that was
That was
great.
me,
You're like the DJ over there.
yeah. Oops.
Danish Oaks Drive from RR 121, rural residential single family to R 110 residential single family, as well as item 3.2, project ZTA 23-004, public hearing and possible action on a city initiated zoning text amendment to establish standards and permitting requirements for outdoor sport courts in residential areas. So in addition, today we will we've got our expert here to talk about the form-based code discussion. And if you had a chance to listen to the city council meeting, we're kind of needing to move towards us having our bite at the apple over the next couple months here and kind of getting through our questions a little bit before we pass things on to them. I am hopeful on the sport courts text amendment that if possible, it would be wonderful if we get to the point that we could get something to be voted on today and that could be passed on to the city council, just given the time frame and the back and forth. All that being said, good to see your smiling faces, and we'll turn the time over to staff to present a little bit on our business items and then take us into form-based code discussion.
Thank you. Couple things quickly. I want to acknowledge Ian and Samantha are joining us via Zoom tonight.
Ah, great.
And then I would also recommend that we swap. We do the form-based code update quickly first while we have the consultant here. I think it's 15 or 20 minutes. And we can
Fantastic.
get through that and then move on to the
Yeah,
agenda items if you're okay with that.
that sounds great.
So we'll invite Mark up and we can go from there.
Are they going on both screens?
Yes,
Okay.
yep. All right.
Okay. Good, back again to talk about form-based code, just to give you an update and kind of talk through questions and process and where we are. In the grand scheme of things.
Which one would you like to start with?
Let's start with the Q&A. Okay, so this, I believe, was in your packet. I think Samantha included this in your packet. What we've been doing is kind of documenting questions that have been submitted so we can refer back to them as much as possible. So as we've been going through these meetings over the last several months, we just want to make sure that we're addressing questions as we go. The city council as well had questions that we kind of included in this document. I think this Q&A document, I think you can keep around forever because no matter what happens, the same questions are going to come up. You might have a property owner with a similar question, just having that that document around to kind of answer those questions. So that one we've been working through. If no one has any specific questions at the moment, just to kind of give you a sense of kind of next steps, what we're preparing for at this point is kind of a public open house, an opportunity for the public to come ask questions, property owners to talk about how does the form-based code work, how does it benefit them, what sort of process will they have to go through. Go to the boards, yeah. So we've got a few so we've got, I'm gonna do a poll. There we go. Okay, so we've got a handful of boards. The intent of these boards is to give people as much or as little information as they need. Form-based code can get really technical, as you may have deduced. And so what we want to do with the public open house is give people an opportunity to talk to someone one-on-one, ask questions, understand why it is, what's the kind of driving force behind this, what's the vision of what we want to see. We look at Cottonwood Heights in 20 years. How does the kind of redevelopment of parcels really kind of incrementally build a new vision for the commercial areas of the city? So we've got basics of, okay, what parts of the city will this be applied to? As we talked about in the past, this is kind of first iteration of form-based code. Inevitably, you'll add other parts of the city. For the most part, as we talked about in the past, this isn't really applied to single-family neighborhoods. This is really applied to parts of the city that are going to have the opportunity for redevelopment. So right now we're looking at a few nodes along Fort Union. Inevitably, you'll get to kind of other parts, whether it's along Bengal or Wasatch, the gravel pit. There are plenty of other places where this type of code could be applied. So the intent of the boards, again, is to kind of give the basics to say, here's why we're doing this. What is the kind of intent in the end for this to develop? What does the process look like? The intent, again, as we talked about, having thresholds that if development are under certain thresholds and meet certain requirements, they get kind of a fast-tracked approval process. So you as a body and the city council as a body can focus on the larger redevelopment opportunities that take a lot of time, take a lot of discussion. The ones that are, you know, under an acre, under a certain building footprint size, you can kind of give that an administrative approval. We've included, like I mentioned, plenty of information. So if someone wants to get into the nitty-gritty of building types and setbacks and those types of things, the prototype that we've looked at together with you has lots of information to kind of show what does that look like from a process standpoint? What questions get asked in which order? And maybe more than anything to kind of sell to the property owners. This is an opportunity to give them a little bit more leeway in some areas where use is less strictly controlled and it's really more about where is the parking? How does the building address the street? How does the architecture kind of build on that image of what condo heights could be? We've got an example case study to have on the boards. Bountiful has been using a form-based code now for several years. We've also got a list of other cities that have used form-based code. So kind of showing this is not an experiment. This is a proven method to accomplish community goals. And how has that been implemented in other cities that we can look to.
Interestingly, Mark, does it go all the way back to, like, the origin was a city in Florida, is it, like in the fifties or sixties?
Was
that far back?
It wasn't that far back.
Okay.
We'll say the late nineties was the first city
Oh,
where
was that
a
recent?
group of architects got together and said, the way that zoning code works is not getting us what we want. How can we think about it a little bit differently? But from the late nineties to today, there's been hundreds of cities that have adopted form-based codes. They're always calibrated to a specific context. So unlike zoning code, you know, in the 20s when zoning code was invented, cities kind of just cut and pasted and said, well, we're going to do exactly what the city next door does. And what that gets us is not what we want. So the kind of timeline, you know, having a place that's been using it for 30 years in Utah, I'd say the oldest is maybe 15 years old. Salt Lake City was the first to do that, but more suburban cities along what the Wasatch Front have been using them now for several years. And so looking to kind of the product that's giving us is a good way to kind of see the future and what that might look like.
Did Bountiful only extend it along Main Street or did they do it in other
It
parts?
was really just their historic Main Street. And my team was involved with Midvale's Main Street. We have them adopted form-based code. It's probably been maybe 4 years now.
Okay.
And if you go to Midvale's Main Street, there are things happening. You probably haven't been to Midvale's Main Street in a while. But it had similar issues, I'd say, to Bountiful's Main Street, where there was development pressure. The community wanted to preserve historic character, and how do we fit that into an existing.
It's interesting because my grandparents lived like 2 houses off Main Street in
Mm.
Bountiful, so I spent a lot of time there.
Yeah.
And it looks nothing like how it used to look,
Yeah,
but it still has kind of preserved it.
yeah, and that form, I think, is the key there to say, okay, we've got this historic form. How do we require that new development fit in with that form? So other questions? So far, so good. We've included the information for the 4 form districts that will be included in the form-based code. So if someone has a specific question, here's my property, I want to know, what does that form district require? The form district is the closest correlation to a zone. But it's not going to tell you, here is the use. It's going to say, here's a list of uses that you can choose from. So throughout those four form districts. And then we'll include the prototype that I mentioned, we'll include that prototype on a couple of these boards so that if someone really wants to kind of see, okay, how does that really play out? We're talking about site planning, we're talking about height regulation, we're talking about how it addresses the street. The use discussion really doesn't happen until the very end. The use is kind of like, well, the use that you're proposing today, that is going to change over time. What we really care about are the things that aren't going to change with this building. If this building is here for 100 years, how do we make sure that it's something that's reusable for many, many uses?
Well, Mark, let me ask you this. I mean, just based on, you know, the different areas that we're focusing on, and based on your experience, I mean, I'm hoping that this document will provide some guidance to property owners and prospective developers too, in terms of funding sources and you know, how the math can potentially work. And so we've got a case study for what it could look like, just like the picture, but I'd love for us to be able to say, okay, if you put this feature, just, you know, just a separate box that says, okay, if you like this feature was done by this city. And this is the tax method that they used, or a unique development tool that they used in order to accomplish that goal. So those kind of case studies, I think, will be invaluable as part of the document, even if that tool doesn't exist anymore. I think just for the sake of memorializing, hey, the legislature can change from year to year. And so the tool that's available now may not be available next year, but sure, even if it's just to arm our lobbyists to be able to say, listen, this is something that we decided as a city in our form-based code, that this feature is really, really valuable to us. We want you to really focus on pushing this, and we want to be a model for this.
Sure, the code itself, I wouldn't say gives specific guidance about financial tools.
Of course, of course.
But what it does, when we have something like an RDA area established around the town center, that obviously opens up a lot of opportunity for that. And Mill Creek did the same thing, they created an RDA area in order to finance their town center. So I think there may be areas where a city like yours would say, okay, we want to make sure we've got this specific tool in our tool belt in order to, especially where you've got a catalytic site that the city owns and you're developing. When it comes to other property owners, I mean, if someone is in that RDA area, they can also, potentially benefit from that same type of financial tool. And there are many others besides the RDA types of tools. But the code itself doesn't necessarily spell out that more than any kind of broad language.
And I mean, maybe as an example, like a walkability, councilperson Burrell is going to ask the question, are we designing this in a way that there's grant money or whatever funding source, federal, state, or otherwise, that we can maximize that in the midst of what we're suggesting is ideal. So if that's happened other places where it's like, okay, how they make the math pencil? Like what are some of the features that made this palatable for the property owners, for the developers, that made it attractive, in addition to just like, it looks awesome and everything fits better.
I think an example just of how it, when a development application comes in the very first time, it usually doesn't come in just over the counter and they're applying and we're already in the review process. It starts with a meeting and sit down and you go through what the person wants to do. And I think Mark referred to these as tools in a tool belt, which is really great. You have master plans, which are high level. They establish the vision for an area. That's where you address, hey, at a high level, we want this area to be pedestrian oriented or walkable or active transportation friendly or whatever it is. Then you develop an ordinance to implement that policy. In this case, it's the form-based code. And then there are other tools, depending on where you are in the city. Say you're in the town center and you have tax increment financing set up, which we don't yet, but is the goal. You bring all those tools to the table and you work with whoever is redeveloping the land and you say, hey, if you can develop in this vision and implement these things that are really important to the city, there could be an opportunity for you to make a request to the city council to utilize tax increment financing. So you try to make that messaging consistent from general plan to master plans to ordinances, and then you have mechanisms in certain areas like tax increment financing to carry that out and help realize that vision. So I think form-based code is one of those tools, and the goal is that this code aligns with the vision of the master plans above it, and then we have things below it to help implement and carry it out and make that vision possible.
Great, thanks, Mike. The final, maybe the final piece of maybe what we hope will happen next after the public open house, coming back to the planning commission for kind of positive declaration to move forward. The discussion we had at the city council, I guess that was in December. Great discussion. I think there was some good feedback and good questions in that meeting, but overall supportive of the idea that this, as Mike has illustrated, is how do we implement community vision? So when someone says, I want a place that's more walkable, this is very much like, well, here is how we get there. And this is an incremental process. I think you'll get a lot of questions from your constituents that it's like, well, is this a big master plan that someone's going to come in and develop it all at once? And That's not at all what any of this is. This is saying, okay, when a property owner wants to redevelop, we have a clear vision of, okay, here's where your parking goes, here's where the building needs to be located. We're all working towards a collective vision for these particular. I think when you're a couple of years down the road and you feel more comfortable with the form-based code, you may say, okay, how do we start identifying other parts of the city where this could be implemented?
So specifically in our different form zones, what are the minimum and maximum requirements for all of our identified zones? Do we have 6 zones currently or 4 zones?
So there's 4 form districts. And they're really, well, we can go to each of those. So the form districts, basically, we got Union Park Center, which is very much, this is a commercial core. That's where we have the tallest height allowable. Town Center, which is really that intersection of 23rd East only. And then the other 2 are a little more kind of spread out throughout these nodes. So we got Fort Union Boulevard, which is, several areas along that strip, and then the residential transition form district. So those are the 4. Each one of those have a different minimum and maximum height. All of the parameters in the form-based code have a minimum and maximum. And so parking has a minimum and maximum, height has a minimum and maximum. All of those things are spelled out differently for each of those.
And what are the minimum maximum per district currently? From setback and height that we have identified?
Oh, so as far as height?
Yeah.
Height goes.
Height and setbacks.
The Union Park Center, our minimum height 3 stories, maximum height 8. The Town Center, minimum height 2, maximum height 4 stories. Fort Union Boulevard, 2-story minimum, 4-story maximum. And then the residential transition, 2-story minimum, 3-story maximum. So the highest allowable would be in that the Union Park Center area. And these aren't wildly different from what the current zoning allows. It's a little bit of a ramp up in height, but it's not a huge change from what the current zoning allows.
Have the setbacks shifted much?
Setbacks for the most part have shifted in that there's a maximum setback. And so rather than saying okay, you have to be 5 feet away from the property line, say you have to be 5 feet away, but you can't be more than 10 feet away from the property line.
Okay,
And
wonderful.
so that intent again is to bring the buildings up to the street, to address the street in a way that it's, the experience of being on Fort Union isn't just one parking lot after another. We have a continuous arrangement of buildings and the parking is pushed to the back.
Is there commercial requirements or percentage of commercial requirements for base level for residential units at all?
The uses are divided by upper floor versus ground floor. And so there are
Okay.
some commercial uses that are some uses that are only allowed on the upper floors, some uses that are only allowed on the ground floors, but it's not a specific percentage. It's not saying, okay, it has to be this percentage on the ground floor. It's just saying, okay, it's residential, it needs to be on the upper floor. If it's retail, obviously you're on the ground floor. But that's kind of how the uses are categorized, is upper floor versus ground floor.
Like Sam has a comment?
Yeah. Let's hear it, Sam.
Sam.
Hey, are you guys able to hear me at a good volume?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's been a while since I've done one of these through Zoom. I just wanted to make 2 comments to kind of add to this. So great conversation. Just a reminder, maybe more for anyone kind of tuning into this meeting, the form-based code is not going to be regulating residential areas. It's a tool for commercial districts. So just a reminder that single family neighborhoods don't see changes from the form-based code. There's the residential transition district that's kind of the interface between residential neighborhoods and commercial. And that's where you see the height being lower to try to mitigate impact. But just a reminder, this isn't going to be regulating single family neighborhoods. And then just also wanted to make mention, as we maybe move on to the next items here, to keep in mind the open house date for form-based code. We have it penciled in for March 12th, which I believe is a Tuesday. And we'll be doing advertisement about it. It's going to be really geared toward providing information for property owners, those commercial property owners who are going to be in that district area, but anyone's welcome to attend. So yeah, keep that in mind for the spring. That's all I wanted to add on this one.
Sam, thanks for pointing that out, those residential transitions. I think people understanding that my hope is that it softens the transition into where they live instead of having these hard backstops that we have now, that we're gonna have more ebbs and flows into different areas of the city that feel a little bit more organic than they do now.
I think there's a lot of comparable, it's not dissimilar to the intent of the residential office zone that's in place today. But when you have such a rigid land use ordinance like residential office that applies in all these different kinds of places, the execution doesn't always feel like I think the code was intended to feel in certain areas. So you end up with, you know, maybe office buildings that still feel a little bit out of context and make a harsher transition than that code was designed to do. So hopefully this helps achieve that. But a lot of what we're doing with the form-based code isn't drastically different from what our intention was with ordinances today. We're just doing it, I think, in a way that's a little more responsive to the area that each of these districts is in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't interrupt.
No, no, no.
I just had a question, you know, I think I heard in all of these farm districts that the maximum number of stories is 4. Is that correct?
The Union Park maximum is 8.
Okay.
So,
I was just like, wait a minute, I know there's already more than 4 stories in
Yeah,
there.
those are 6
Okay,
today.
yeah, that's the counting my windows and.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I thought you had said 4 for each.
Yeah.
Good questions.
Cute.
Yeah. No, yeah, keep going, Sean.
Yeah, are there any restricted uses that might be different than our current zoning?
Not generally, there's always, you know, the current code has certain restricted uses that are, you know, kind of stay the same with this code. But I think in general, the use tables are meant to make it more responsive to market conditions. To say, okay, property owner is seeing that there's a specific use that they would like to do with the redevelopment. Most of the restricted uses are, you know, the things that are in most codes, you know, they're sexually oriented businesses, vape shops, cannabis, you know, the things that are kind of always on that list of like kind of strictly controlled by the city.
So, and this would eliminate some of the conditional use permit requirements because it's more form-based based off of size.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, and you know, currently conditional use is kind of where your power is, right?
Yeah.
And so as a city, it kind of takes some time to get used to the idea that use is far less of a concern, more than like where does that building sit?
Yeah.
How does it address the street? So giving again property owners a lot more choice and flexibility.
This is very exciting. Just
Good.
being in a lot of the communities, specifically down in Florida, if you've ever spent any time in Rosemary Beach or Seaside, which
Yeah.
I think that this is where it derived from.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Mill Creek has been implementing this, and
Yeah.
you can go and drive any of those projects. I'm really excited about bringing this into Calvin Heights. So
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Seaside, the first city that ever did this in the 90s was Seaside. And you look at, we want to talk about return on investment and value. You know, Seaside is a place where, you know, an 800 square foot condo is selling for $2 million. Like this is really, in the long run, the sort of demand for walkable places that feel intentional, that, you know, that kind of adding value to these areas of the city, I think you're going to see in the long run is going to have a big impact.
And it's nice for our city that it's more of a carrot than a stick. And I appreciate that if you're a property owner in one of these areas, again, just for those who are listening in, that you're not compelled to make a change until you're ready to. But we have some intentionality about what we would like to see there. But it's, you know, you're still a property owner. We still believe in property rights.
Indeed, yeah, I think that the incremental nature of it, and it's really only when someone's ready to build something new. It's not driving out any specific businesses, it's just saying, okay, when redevelopment happens, here's the vision that the city has for these areas.
Any other questions?
So next steps, just to wrap it up, this probably won't be back formally much before the open house. But we're working on getting a webpage up with a lot of these resources, so that can be out there for public review. And then probably shortly after that open house, we'll put it as a formal agenda item where you can start taking public comment and working towards making a recommendation to the city council.
I would love everybody to contribute to FAQs. So if you haven't submitted something yet, think through the lens of your own experience, but also just what somebody who hasn't sat in all these meetings, what they would ask. Talk to the people in your sphere of influence, what questions they have, so we can shine a light on that stuff. It's just good governance when people don't feel like this stuff is happening in the dark of night.
Okay,
Great. Hey, thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
thanks, Marcia.
Thank you.
Okay, if you're okay, we'll just move on to the
Yeah,
agenda
let's
item.
do it.
The first one we'll do is the rezone, and I'll defer to Sam for that one.
Okay, everybody, I'll be your cruise director here. Let's see. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen here. Before I get going, are you guys able to see me moving my cursor?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. That will make it easier for me to point out certain parts of it. So good to know. Great. I'm going to take us through item ZMA 23002. This is a zoning map amendment application for 7980 South Danish Oaks Drive. Also, just an open note here to stop me at any point if my audio cuts out. If you can't hear me, I won't know otherwise, so let me know. Great. So a zoning map amendment application is just another name for a rezone. So that's what we're looking at tonight. The property at hand is about 0.45 acres, and they're proposing a rezone from RR121, which is a rural residential single family zone, to R110, which is a single family residential zone. So this is just a little bit of information about the property and kind of a site photo. It doesn't show the whole piece, but where it's tucked back, Google Street Maps was not an option. So this is a good on-site photo for you. Okay, here's some vicinity maps. So on the left, we see the immediate vicinity, the subject properties here in the bottom left corner with a blue highlight. Here we have, at the top of our photo, we've got Bengal Boulevard, and then we have Danish Pine Lane, which is the Danish Pine subdivision. And then we have Danish Road, kind of wrapping this way. And then just for some more context in the grander scheme of the city, this arrow is pointing to where the property is. You can see in context, it's going to be west of Wasatch Boulevard. That's running kind of on a diagonal here. And then we have Bengal Boulevard running this way. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an orientation. This is the cemetery up there on Bengal Boulevard, just to kind of give you a reference point. All right, so let's get into the request here. They are requesting a rezone again from RR121. The RR signifies again that it's rural residential, to R110. If we look over here at our map, the symbology here will be helpful. So the stars indicate the parcels that are owned by the applicant. So the applicant owns the subject property, which is here in the blue with the star. And then they also own the two adjacent parcels. And they are hoping to combine all three through a lot consolidation in order to have more space to build a home and have yard space. Two of the parcels you can see here are zoned R110 today. That's that kind of golden yellow color. But the subject property for this application is zoned RR121. So procedurally, lot consolidation needs to have unilateral zoning in order for us to consolidate properties. Otherwise, the resulting combined parcel would have mixed zoning across it. So that is why the applicant was directed to the zoning map amendment process. So this is a side-by-side showing on the left, the current zoning. You can see that island of light green, the RR121, and then the proposed on the right. So if this application were to be approved, that would match the zoning around it. We can come back to these as needed if that's helpful. Oh, and then I will just note the beige color kind of around on all sides is R18, which is just residential single family zone. Okay, talking a little bit about the background on this one. Some of y'all might remember this if you've been on the commission for a little bit longer, maybe not. But the subject property's isolated RR 121 zoning is fairly recent, kind of a recent circumstance. Prior to 2019, the area to the north was also zoned RR 121. So this old zoning map here shows, okay, here's the subject property. We see that what's to the south was always zoned R110, but what was to the north used to be RR 121. So if we flip back one, this property is kind of an island, was not always the case. Oh, and I have the map here again, just as kind of reference. The history on that is that in 2019, a rezone was approved, which changed this property here to R110 as part of the Danish Pines subdivision application. The information's all listed in your packet, but staff recalls that the former owner of the subject property was not interested in including their parcel in that project. So it remained unchanged while Danish Pines rezoned to R110. So that's a little bit of history on why this is sort of on its own. Looking at the analysis of the proposal, the proposed rezone actually brings the parcel into conformity with the zoning ordinance. So the property is under half an acre, and the RR 121 zone, which is the current zoning, requires half-acre lots. So this property actually doesn't comply with the current zone it's in. But if it were rezoned to R110, it would comply and surpass the lot size requirement in that zone, which is 10,000 square feet. So from that perspective, it's a good fit. The proposed rezone also would bring the property into conformance with the land use map. So the land use map is kind of the long range map that identifies future preferred development for different parts of the city. It's kind of the mapping counterpart to the city's general plan. And that land use map identifies that this property should be low density residential. The current zoning is considered rural residential zoning. The proposed zoning is considered low density residential. So a rezone would also bring it into conformity with the long range plan for this property. Talking a little bit about potential development from a rezone. I will make the disclaimer that a rezone application doesn't approve any development, but of course, there's always the question of if this is rezoned, what could be done with the property. The permitted uses are actually really similar between the existing and the proposed zones. Both really have a main purpose of providing single family residential development. The key difference is that the existing rural residential zoning has some livestock allowances, but really similar. The conditional uses in either zone would require planning commission approval. So not a huge difference in use. Potential development we find is really compatible with what's there, given that the adjacent properties are already zoned R110. So if we flip back one, we see that the subdivision to the south, which is Watson Hollow, that's already zoned R110. Subdivision to the north, which is Danish Pines, also already zoned R110. So it's consistent with what's there. And I did just want to make the note, any future development would need to comply with any of the applicable requirements from our sensitive lands evaluation and development standards or SLUDS ordinance. This property is in the sensitive lands overlay zone, and it does have some grade change on the back. So the applicant is aware of this. They've had a couple of pre-application meetings to talk about that SLUDS requirement, but did just kind of want to throw that in there that would be a part of any subsequent building permit for sure. So based on the analysis I've summarized here, which is more at length in your packet, and the below findings, we do recommend approval. We find this is consistent with the zoning ordinance, consistent with the general plan, compatible with surrounding neighborhood, and the application has been made pursuant to city code. Public hearing has been held pursuant to city code and state code. So we're recommending approval of this. This would be for the Planning Commission a recommendation of approval. It's a legislative item. So you would, rather than making a motion to approve or deny the project, any motion would be made to make a recommendation for or against. we can talk a little bit more about public comment maybe in the business session. We did not receive public comment in advance of this meeting at the time these slides were made. I will say right before the meeting, we got a couple of public comments with some questions about the project. Staff has responded to those and we'll forward them on to the commission tomorrow since they came in after the cutoff. But that's really the gist of the information I have to share with you. If you have questions, I can go back to any of the slides as needed.
Got a quick question, Sam.
Yeah.
I think you said that there had been some preliminary meetings with the applicant in terms of where they might build a house. Is that accurate?
Yeah, city staff offers pre-application meetings for people who want to just kind of talk about options before they invest too much in it. They have not submitted, to my knowledge, like a building permit application where we would be formally reviewing anything, but they have met with us a couple times to talk about what the setback requirements are, what it would look like if they combined the lots, just those preliminary conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I drove it right before the meeting and there's a house under construction just to the north of the 3 parcels. But there's a, it's a significant drop off at the south end of that cul-de-sac. I was just curious, like,
Yeah.
for house placement and whatnot, how they're gonna make that work.
Yeah, I mean, good question. I'm not an architect for sure, but they are well aware of the floods ordinance and the limitations that it has there. And I think that's part of the reason that they may want to consolidate these lots, so they just have a little more room to use in fitting something, given the constraints of a steep slope.
Sam, do you mind if I address just kind of what was talked about in some of those DRC meetings?
No, please, by all means, go ahead.
So a little bit of history, Danish Pines is the subdivision where the northern subdivision where the cul-de-sac is. The lot that kind of tip of the triangle on the top, that top star, that was all originally, they were trying to make that a lot in the subdivision. The subject parcel that's being applied for a rezone on was owned by a completely different party. Not Castlewood, who entitled Danish Pines, and not Ivory, who entitled Watson Hollow to the south. It was a landlocked parcel in the middle, kind of a holdout in that whole deal, which is why it exists as an island today. So the current owner and applicant team is hoping to consolidate all 3 of those parcels. There is an approved grading on the plans for the Danish Pines subdivision that shows how that property needs to be graded and kind of dictates where you can or cannot add or remove fill and build a house. So there is some existing baseline information of grading on that property that they are aware of. A lot of it is not on the subject parcel, but with the 3 parcels, they have to consolidate them. So that's why we're here today.
Is that just for the sake of clarity? Would it be appropriate to have something, like a notation on the plat, or how confident are we that they're gonna move on this quickly? I mean, based on other properties and other developments where potentially could be engineering, if it gets nasty or gets crazy, and that would be a rough gotcha if you never know if they're gonna flip the lot, and hopefully they're not, and it doesn't sound like they're going to, but is that the type of thing that we would want a note in the plat?
It's not part
So
of
there's actually not a plat. Oh.
Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I can't see anyone's body language or read lips or anything. There's not a plat for these properties. It's not part of an existing subdivision. It was not included in Danish Pines nor Watson Hollow. And the lot consolidation doesn't require them to do a plat. So there's not a plat to add a note to. I would say that it probably wouldn't be appropriate to put a stipulation on that as part of a rezone application. The rezone's, just changing the zone. It's not approving any development. It's not putting into place a development plan. So I don't think that would be an appropriate component of this application at hand. If they apply for a building permit and start the process, there's kind of a timeline they need to keep with in order to keep the permit active. And that kind of self-regulates there, but that's my perspective on that.
Yeah, it could rezone and then never develop, but the trigger is the permit application or the lot consolidation application when we start to look at the grading and the drainage and the access to the lot and all the things that buildable lot would need to have to be able to be built on.
I'm very excited about this. I mean, we have so many flag lots that causes so much grief.
Mhm.
If you've been on this commission long enough, flag lots are just, they're tough and it creates difficulties between neighbors and inconsistencies in the code that are just difficult, and what a wonderful solution. So as long as I've just
Yeah.
in the residents,
Expensive.
Yeah, where we have kind of just this island of zoning, it definitely would be nice for it to be consistent with what's around it. And then just again, I'll remind everybody, it doesn't actually meet the standards for the current zoning. So of course, from a staff perspective, we want it to be in conformance. We want it to actually meet the zone it's in. So even if they didn't move forward with consolidating them and developing on them, moving it to R110 from a staff perspective is a good move because it makes it a conforming lot. But yeah, any other questions from the commission? I don't want to take up all of your time. I know you have another item to talk about, but I'm happy to run through questions still.
can you tell us, Sam, I mean, I know that it came in after the deadline, but there are 10 property owners that are adjacent. The other
Yeah.
downside for us is that if we're gonna vote on this tonight and there are public comments that we're not gonna be aware of until tomorrow,
Sure, yeah.
if
I
you
can
can
summarize those.
provide a little color
Um,
commentary, that would be, I think it would be helpful to all of us.
Yeah, for sure. And I will just, for the sake of anyone tuning in, again, say this wouldn't be a final verdict tonight. Planning Commission makes a recommendation, then it would go to the city council. So there will be additional opportunities to keep giving comment if that's of interest to anybody. The first one wasn't maybe so much a public comment, just with some questions for staff. The area here, are you guys still seeing my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, so this area is part of Watson Hollow subdivision, and roughly where I'm covering is a perpetual open space area on that plat. The subject property, again, is not part of that, but the first public comment we got, I believe, was thinking it was, and so it had some concerns about, hey, I thought this was open space, what's going on? So it was just kind of a clarification on it's not actually part of that open space, it's separate. The second public comment we got had some concerns about the sleds ordinance. Again, we've talked about how the applicant will need to meet that in entirety. Had some concerns about just maybe the impact of like a house on that hill vis-a-vis the view of surrounding neighbors. That's a very common concern we hear. Unfortunately, that doesn't negate the right people have to develop on their property, although it is a hard impact. And then, there was also a concern about the packet, the Planning Commission packet. There was a glitch with the link on the website, and so they had some issues seeing it. So we sent them the packet directly and fixed that on the website. But I think that was the gist of it. Mike, do you recall anything else from that most recent comment?
The only other thing was a comment about the address of the lot. It's address off of like
Oh.
Danish Oaks Drive. So I think there was
Yeah,
probably
great,
some confusion
great.
of how that lot is accessed, and the answer is it would be accessed from the north by a lot consolidation and not through the homes in Watson Hollow to the south.
I have a technical question.
Yeah, great question. So it is a weird addressing. So Danish Oaks Drive obviously is down here. It seems very odd that this address is Danish Oaks Drive, but that is what's assigned to it. And again, if it were consolidated, this lot doesn't have access. So this parcel doesn't have access, I should say. So it would be done off that cul-de-sac.
I have a technical question on this one. In R110, is there a limitation on number of stories and height, or is it just height? And it's a height measure.
It's just height in those zones. Yeah. So in all the residential zones, height is measured from average existing grade. I believe for this property, they may be limited a little more since it's in sleds, but it depends on the grade of the lot, which I don't have that measurement.
So some cities measure from top back of curb,
Yeah,
which would be where the road is. Our Cottonwood Heights does not. So the approved grading plan that I referred to for Danish Pines does have grading for this area. Whatever grade is shown on that is the existing grade from which building height is measured. So regardless of if they take away dirt or add fill, we have a baseline already established, and we know we have engineers certify the elevations.
so it's gonna go from that level.
It'll be down, it's not gonna be 35 feet from where the curb is today. It'll be, off of the natural kind of contour of
Yeah.
where that grading ended up.
I mean, that was the concern is like, because if it's, let's say it's 35 feet or whatnot, and it's measured from the road, you could have a 60-foot massing.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. There may be some fill on that approved grading plan, but it's gonna be in line with the rest of the grading in that Danish Pine subdivision. But it's.
And I would just add, that's the same regardless of zone. So it's measured the same way, whether it's RR 121 or R110 in terms of how we calculate height. So that's consistent.
Interesting.
Great. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen if that's okay with you guys. Are you done on this one?
Sam, I have a really quick question. I pulled up the map in regards to that open space. And it looks like all of the properties adjacent are privately owned. So which parcel did you say was open space that's adjacent to this?
Yeah, I can actually pull up the plat maybe so everyone can see it. Let me just switch which screen I'm sharing. So it's perpetual open space on private properties. So it's kind of a weird fusion.
More of an
I guess
easement.
I would say. Let me pull up that a nice Teams message here. Are you guys seeing that plat with like a big yellow highlight?
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. So the perpetual open space, again, this is Watson Hollow plat adjacent. This like diagonal hashing is the perpetual open. It's just, non-buildable area. It's not public space. It's privately owned. It's part of these lots, but it's non-buildable. So I think it's a very fair question of like, hey, I thought that was part of it. It's not. Yellow highlight is subject property. It's outside of that plat, but that's the context there.
Great, thank you.
Okay, 8 minutes to talk about sport courts. That's all you need, right?
Great.
I only have a few things. The ordinance is unchanged. I won't go over it again unless you have questions. I added one just kind of staff caveat to the staff memo. There have been questions and debate on the approach to take with this ordinance since it became a directive of staff. And the direction we got from the council, I guess previous council early on, was don't single out any particular use. So that's where the ordinance draft has come from, is trying to regulate the structure rather than the use. The analysis that we put in the staff memo that I just want to emphasize here, and you do what you want with it, and then I'll be quiet, is pickleball does have a unique impact beyond, a basketball and a tennis court. So there could be a completely valid separate way to prepare an ordinance that looks at the use and, goes down the conditional use route for the pickleball activity itself. That's not the way we've chosen to go with it or been kind of directed by the council to go with it, but all the research and kind of articles we've read do show and play out that pickleball of all these outdoor court sports has a different impact than the other ones. So there's my 2 cents, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay,
I can make a comment about it, if that's all right.
great for it. Go for it.
I spent a little time earlier today looking at the medical literature, not a lot, but a little bit on the subject of pickleball. And I found it interesting that there is some discussion in medical literature about pickleball, and most of it is acknowledging that we have an aging population. Pickleball is something that I'm not a pickleball player myself, so Mike, you might have some commentary on this, but pickleball is not that difficult to go out and play and have some fun with. So people who have been sedentary for much of their life can go out and learn to be more active, and pickleball is a good way to do that. Of course, it can become very competitive as well, and that's probably where some of the noise comes in. But it is something that is not going away, I suspect. The little bit of literature that I looked at really did suggest that this is a really good thing for society to be more physically active. And from a medical point of view, I've encouraged many patients to be more physically active. Those good things for their body and good things for their mind. And I think pickleball is not going to go away. So I think it's a good thing that we are addressing this early on. My thought early on in this discussion was that this would fade and be less of an issue with time. But I'm starting to reconsider that. I think it'll be with us for a long time. So I think it's well that we address it as well as we can. I also looked at some noise or sound mitigation options, and I was thinking of starting a new job. I looked at how much it would cost to put in some structures to diminish the sound, and to do it. The one thing I looked at, it was about $33,000 to put in some sound that would bring the decibel range down by, I think, 28 decibels. So not cheap to do the mitigation to keep the sound under control. Anyway, good to discuss this up front, I think.
Great. Other thoughts?
I'm curious as I read all the comments that come in. None of them mention any other sport but pickleball. I'm wondering if we've ever had other complaints about basketball being too noisy, or tennis, or any other sport other than the pickleball.
This will not be a scientific response. I recall in 12 or so years I've worked here, a few complaints over the years about not the activity of the sport, but fencing and lighting. Mainly basketball sport courts, I think. Maybe, probably less than a handful total. And now we have.
I would say anecdotally, oh, sorry, Mike.
Go ahead.
I would say anecdotally, the calls I've gotten about other sports have been more about like stray objects coming into the yard. Just of like, oh, these neighbor kids are playing basketball and the basketball keeps ending up in my yard. I don't believe I've gotten any that were about the noise of other sports.
I guess where I'm going with this is you said in this, it says that, well, the pickleball has some unique impacts, and I in studying the noise of it, it does. And it's the noisiest of the group. The issue that we really haven't talked about yet is what are we going to address the grandfathered ones? We're going to grandfather some in. And the complaints that we've gotten are from those courts because we haven't built any new ones. So I don't know that we're going to solve that problem unless we do something about those courts that are already built and regulate them in some way.
It's a grandfathered non-conforming use.
The structure itself would be allowed. The noise violation, a noise violation is a noise violation.
Yeah.
So, you could go enforcement down that route.
Okay.
But anything that's been formally approved in terms of structure and fencing and lighting, and it's gone through the official city process and it's legal, will, regardless of what the ordinance ends up, those will be allowed to stay.
I understand that. But what I really am saying is that we aren't going to get rid of the problem, and because they're the ones that people are complaining about now. What we're trying to do is mitigate what's going to happen in the future.
To Commissioner Smith's point of, this is probably something that we'll continue to see as the sport continues to grow even more in popularity.
Well, we don't want to discourage the others. There's indoor ones that they do, but I don't know. That's the frustrating part for me. It's the noise that everybody's upset about. And the noise is well above the standard that the county's put out, and we got to live with that. I don't see a happy way for anybody.
Just as a reminder, in that context, we've been asked to put this together and send a recommendation on to the city council. So it behooves us, whether we think we should or shouldn't, we've been asked by the city council to provide something. And this will not be the final word for sure. And as much public comment as we get, it will increase exponentially the moment that this hits prime time of the city council. So I want you to rest assured that I guarantee there will likely be some tweaks after. So whether it stays broad or gets specific, I'm confident that there's going to be a lot of public feedback.
We have 30 seconds.
What is the current lighting ordinance that we have for these types of things? That is regulated currently, correct?
Yeah, standard pickleball lighting wouldn't be allowed under current ordinance. It's 12-foot lights and pretty restrictive in terms of how bright they can be. They have to be shielded and downward. A pickleball light is like 25 feet and way brighter than our ordinance allows in residential zones. So staff doesn't see lighting as an issue unless it's put in illegally, which we can enforce that.
Okay, so we can already enforce that. So it's 100% the sound. So, you know, from a sport court standpoint, we're not worried about sport courts, but we're more worried about pickleball. Is that what I'm kind of reading
Well,
between the lines of?
I think there's a concern, yes, pickleball, but I mean, I think also though that there could be potentially other things or other sports that might happen. I mean, I'm in support of the ordinance, because I do feel like something needs to be, the process needs to be started and whatever that may lead to, but yeah, I mean, the things we could, I guess there could be no ordinance and you can call and ask the ordinance people to come take care of noise. I think we're gonna have to look at increasing that staff significantly and have them available something other than and on weekends, because not there today. And so, anyway,
Can I recommend we adjourn and continue in the business meeting?
Are you okay? You want to make your comment before we do that?
Yeah, as long as, I mean, we can still have
Yeah,
the
yeah,
back
please.
and forth amongst ourselves within the
For sure.
meeting. Okay. I
Are
can
you okay
hold
with that?
comment.
Made a
Thank
motion.
you.
You get first bite at the apple. When we get to that.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.